She found a deed folded in her father's Bible. It led to a farm no one knew existed. My story starts on the day I legally stopped being a problem for the state of Oregon and became a problem for myself. My 18th birthday. It wasn't a day for cake or balloons. It was a day for paperwork. Release forms, liability waivers, final status checklists. I sat in Mrs. Albright's beige office, the air thick with the scent of stale coffee and industrial-grade carpet cleaner, and signed my name over and over again. Maya Callan. Maya Callan. With each signature, I felt a piece of the last 10 years fall away. Not like a weight being lifted, but like a scaffold being kicked out from under me. For a decade, since my father died and my world dissolved, the system had been my home. A series of houses, a roster of faces, a rule book as thick as a phone book. Now, the book was closed. This is my story. It's about what happens when you're handed the end of a thread from a life you never knew you had. If you've ever felt like you were standing at a crossroads with no map, maybe stick with this. Subscribe if you feel a connection, and let's see where this road takes us. Because on that day, I had no idea where it was leading me. Mrs. Albright slid a cardboard box across the desk. It was a standard issue file box, gray and dusty, with the words Callan, David, written in faded black marker on the side. "These are your father's personal effects," she said, her voice its usual blend of professional detachment and weary sympathy. "They've been in storage at the county annex. We're required to turn them over to you upon your majority." My majority. It sounded so grand, like I was about to ascend to a throne instead of being politely shown the door of the Glenwood House for Transitional Youth with a final check for $200 and a list of shelters in the Portland area. I looked at the box. In 10 years, no one had ever mentioned it. 10 years of being a foster kid, a ward of the state, a case file. I was told my father, David Callan, had died in a workplace accident on a logging crew. I was told he was a good man, but a rolling stone, that he had no family, no savings, no plan. I was 8 years old. All I had left of him was a single, blurry photograph and a memory of the way his flannel shirt smelled like sawdust and pine needles. "That's it?" I asked, my voice smaller than I wanted it to be. "This is everything?" Mrs. Albright gave a small, sad shrug. "As far as the official record is concerned, yes." His landlord packed it up. "It's mostly just books and papers, I think. No one's ever opened it." She pushed a final form toward me, a receipt for the box. I signed my name one last time. Maya Callan. I was now the official owner of a box of ghosts. I spent my last night at Glenwood in my small, white room, the box sitting on the floor like an unexploded bomb. The other girls, most of them younger, had tried to throw me a party, which consisted of a corner store cupcake with a bent candle and a chorus of off-key happy birthday. I'd smiled and thanked them, but my mind was on the box. What could be inside? Old bills? Half-finished novels? Evidence of the messy, rootless life I'd been told he lived. I was afraid to open it. Afraid it would confirm the story, that it would be full of nothing, proving that I came from nothing. But I was also afraid not to. It was the only piece of him I had. Around midnight, when the house was finally quiet except for the hum of the ancient refrigerator downstairs, I sat on the floor and pulled at the packing tape. It was old and brittle, cracking under my fingernails. The cardboard flaps sighed open, releasing a decade-old puff of stale, dusty air. It smelled like old paper and something else. Something faint and familiar. Cedar. Just a hint. Inside, it was exactly what Mrs. Albright had predicted. Books, a lot of them. Worn paperbacks, mostly poetry and history. There was a stack of pay stubs from various logging and construction companies up and down the coast. A cheap watch with a cracked face, stopped at 2:17. A Zippo lighter that wouldn't spark. It was the debris of a life lived on the move. It was disappointing. It was exactly the story I had been told. I dug deeper, my fingers brushing against the bottom of the box. Underneath a tattered copy of Leaves of Grass was something heavier. I pulled it out. It was a Bible. Not a fancy one, just a simple black leather-bound King James version, the kind you find in motel drawers. The leather was worn smooth at the corners. His name wasn't embossed on the front. There was nothing to mark it as his, but I knew. I felt it. A strange, cold certainty settled in my chest. I opened the cover. On the flyleaf, in neat, blocky handwriting, was his name, David Callan. And below it, a date, the day I was born. My breath caught in my throat. I traced the letters of his name. It was the first time I had seen his handwriting. I flipped through the pages. They were thin and delicate, filled with impossibly small print. He hadn't been a religious man, not from what I remembered. Why a Bible? Then I saw it, tucked between the pages of Proverbs, a slight bulge. A piece of paper folded into a small, tight square. My fingers trembled as I worked it free. It was old, stiff paper, yellowed at the creases. I unfolded it carefully, my heart pounding a strange, heavy rhythm against my ribs. It wasn't a letter. It wasn't a photograph. It was a document, a deed. At the top, in ornate official script, were the words, "Quitclaim Deed." Below that, a property description full of arcane language about sections, townships, and ranges. And then a name. Grantee, David Callan. And an address. Not a street number, but a rural route and a town I'd never heard of. Stillwater, Oregon. A quick search on my phone, the screen a bright beacon in the dark room, told me Stillwater was a tiny, unincorporated community in the Cascade foothills, about 3 hours east of Portland. A ghost of a town, according to the search results. Population, dwindling. Main industry, gone. I stared at the deed and then back at my phone. A farm. The description mentioned 50 acres, a farmhouse, and a barn. 50 acres. My father, the man with no plan and no roots, had apparently owned 50 acres of land. No one had ever mentioned it. Not the social workers, not the lawyers, not the state. For 10 years, I had been an orphan, a ward of the state, shuffled from one temporary home to another, while a place that was mine, or had been his, sat empty. A wave of anger, hot and sharp, washed over me, so intense it made me dizzy. It was followed by a flood of questions. Why? Why did he have this? Why did he never tell anyone? Why did he hide the deed in a Bible? The last bus out of Portland that headed even remotely in that direction left at 7 a.m. I looked at the clock on my phone. 1:45 a.m. I had $200, a backpack with everything I owned, and a box containing a Bible with a deed to a place that might not even exist anymore. It wasn't a plan, but it was better than a list of homeless shelters. It was a direction. It was a thread. And for the first time in a very long time, I felt the need to pull on it, no matter what unraveled. The bus station at dawn is a special kind of purgatory. It's a place of arrivals and departures, but mostly it feels like a place of waiting. The air was thick with the smell of diesel fumes and disinfectant, and the people scattered on the hard plastic benches all had the same look on their faces. A mixture of exhaustion and grim determination. I fit right in. I bought my ticket to a town called Sandy, the closest stop to Stillwater, which the man behind the counter had to look up on a map. "Not much out there, kid," he'd said, his voice gravelly. "You sure that's where you want to go?" I wasn't sure of anything, but I nodded. "I'm sure." The bus ride was 3 hours of watching the city bleed away into suburbs, then into farmland, and finally into the dense, dark green of the Oregon foothills. The sky was a high, flat gray, the clouds so low they seemed to snag on the tops of the Douglas firs. Rain began to streak the dirty windows, blurring the landscape into a watercolor of green and gray. I held my backpack tight in my lap. The box with my father's things was stowed in the luggage compartment below. I'd almost left it behind, thinking it would be too much to carry, but at the last second, I couldn't do it. It felt like the only real thing I owned. I kept my hand in my pocket, my fingers wrapped around the folded deed. I'd taken a picture of it with my phone, but I needed the feel of the actual paper. It was my anchor in a world that was rapidly becoming unfamiliar. My entire life had been lived within the 20-mile radius of a single city. I was a creature of concrete and traffic noise, of group home schedules and the shrill bell of a school hallway. This quiet, this endless green, was as alien to me as the surface of the moon. With every mile, the knot of anxiety in my stomach tightened. What was I doing? I was chasing a ghost based on a piece of paper I didn't understand. What if the farm was gone? Sold off for back taxes decades ago? What if it was a ruin, a pile of rotten wood sinking back into the earth? What if this was just another dead end, another way to be disappointed by the father I barely knew? The bus wheezed to a stop in Sandy, a small town clinging to the side of the highway. The driver announced a 30-minute layover. I got off, needing to stretch my legs. A small diner across the street promised coffee. I went in and ordered a black coffee I couldn't afford and sat at the counter. A man in a trucker hat nursing a cup next to me glanced over. "Headed up the mountain?" he asked, his voice friendly. I nodded, not feeling like talking. "Where to?" I hesitated. "A place called Stillwater." He raised his eyebrows. "Stillwater? Haven't heard that name in a while. My grandpa used to work the mill there before it closed down. Nothing but ghosts and trees there now. You got family there?" The question hung in the air. Did I? "Something like that," I mumbled into my cup. He seemed to get the hint and turned back to his coffee. "Well, good luck to you," he said. "The bus won't take you all the way. You'll have to hitch from the junction." Great. Another logistical hurdle I hadn't anticipated. I finished my coffee, the bitter liquid doing little to warm the chill I felt inside. Back on the bus, the landscape grew wilder. The road narrowed, winding its way up into the mountains. The rain was coming down harder now, a steady, rhythmic drumming on the roof. My phone had lost its signal an hour ago. I felt utterly and completely alone. Finally, the bus driver called out, "Route 26 junction. End of the line for Stillwater." I was the only one who got off. The bus pulled away, its red taillights disappearing into the mist, leaving me standing under the meager shelter of a wooden lean-to at the side of a deserted highway. A single, weathered sign pointed down a smaller, pockmarked asphalt road. Stillwater, 12 miles. 12 miles. It might as well have been 100. The rain was cold, seeping into the shoulders of my thin jacket. I pulled my hood up and started walking. There was nothing else to do. The silence was immense. The only sounds were the drip of water from the trees, the squelch of my own footsteps on the wet pavement, and the frantic beating of my own heart. I walked for what felt like hours. A few cars passed, their headlights cutting through the gray afternoon, but none of them slowed down. I probably looked like a runaway, which, I supposed, I was. My jeans were soaked through, my sneakers were squishing with every step, and a deep, bone-aching cold had set in. Just as I was starting to lose hope, to think that maybe I should just sit down on the side of the road and cry, a battered-looking pickup truck, a decade-old Ford in a faded blue, slowed down beside me. The passenger window rolled down with an electric whine. An old woman with a cloud of white hair and the face etched with 1,000 tiny lines peered out at me. "You're gonna catch your death out here, child," she said, her voice raspy but kind. "Where are you headed?" "Stillwater," I said, my teeth chattering. "I'm looking for a property, the old Callan place." Her eyes, a startlingly bright blue, widened in surprise. "David Callan's place? Lord have mercy. No one's been out to that property in 15, maybe 20 years. She looked me up and down, a flicker of something, recognition, pity, in her gaze. "Well, get in. I'm headed that way. Name's June." I didn't hesitate. I threw my backpack in the truck bed next to some bags of chicken feed and climbed into the warm, cluttered cab. It smelled of hay and coffee and wet dog. "Thank you," I said, my voice thick with relief. "I'm Maya." "I know who you are," she said quietly, pulling back onto the road. "You've got your father's eyes." The words hit me like a physical blow. She knew him. This stranger, this random woman who had picked me up on the side of the road, knew my father. The thread I was pulling on had just led me to someone who had known him. The farm, the deed, the mystery, it was all suddenly, terrifyingly real. June didn't say much more as we drove, and I was too overwhelmed to ask the questions that were screaming in my head. The road turned from crumbling asphalt to gravel. We passed a few houses, lights on in the windows against the gloomy afternoon, and then nothing. Just trees and more trees. Finally, she slowed the truck and pointed. "There it is, end of the lane." A barely visible dirt track, flanked by two rotting wooden posts that might have once held a gate, disappeared into a thicket of overgrown blackberry bushes and ferns. "You sure you want to be here?" June asked, her voice gentle. I looked down the dark, uninviting lane. I thought of the group home, of Mrs. Albright's pitying eyes, of the list of shelters in my bag. I thought of the deed, folded safely in my pocket. "I have to be," I said. She nodded, a slow, sad understanding on her face. "The house is probably still standing. David built it to last. He was a good builder." She put the truck in park. "Listen, Maya, I don't know what you're looking for out here, but this place, it holds a lot of history, a lot of pain." She reached into her glove compartment and pulled out a small, heavy flashlight. "Take this, and my number." She scribbled it on a piece of paper. "The power's been off for years. You call me if you need anything, anything at all. I live just a mile back." I took the flashlight and the number, my fingers numb. "Thank you, June, for everything." "You look after yourself," she said, and with a final, worried look, she put the truck in gear and drove away, leaving me alone at the entrance to my father's land. The silence she left behind was even deeper than before. I stood there for a long moment, the rain plastering my hair to my forehead, and stared down the lane. This was it, the end of the line. Taking a deep breath, I shouldered my backpack and started walking into the shadows. The lane was less a path and more a suggestion. Thorny blackberry canes reached out like grasping arms, snagging on my jacket and jeans. The ground beneath my feet was soft and spongy with years of fallen leaves and pine needles, and the air was heavy with the smell of damp earth, rotting wood, and wild, growing things. It was a green tunnel, the light from the gray sky almost completely filtered out by the dense canopy of fir and cedar trees. After about 100 yards, the lane opened into a small clearing. And there it was, the house. It wasn't a ruin, not exactly. It was still standing, a simple two-story structure made of dark, weathered wood. But it was in a state of profound neglect. The porch roof sagged dangerously in the middle, one of its support posts having rotted away at the base. The windows were dark and blank, like vacant eyes, and one on the second floor was broken, a jagged hole gaping open to the elements. A massive climbing rose, gone wild, had conquered half of the front wall, its thorny branches covering the siding and reaching for the roof. To the left of the house stood the barn, a larger, more imposing structure, its roofline still straight and true, though some of its vertical siding had warped and pulled away. The whole scene was one of quiet, slow decay, of nature patiently reclaiming what it had lost. It was daunting, it was heartbreaking, but it was also beautiful in a strange, sad way. It looked like a place that had been loved once, and then forgotten for a very long time. I walked up the 3 rickety steps to the porch, testing each one with my weight before committing. The front door was solid oak, painted a dark green that was now peeling in long strips. The brass doorknob was tarnished black. There was a keyhole, but of course, I had no key. I tried the knob. Locked, of course. I peered through one of the grimy front windows. It was too dark to see much, just the ghostly shapes of furniture covered in white cloths, like a room full of sleeping giants. I walked around the side of the house. The rain had eased to a fine mist. The air was cold and clean. I found a side door leading into what looked like a mudroom. I tried the knob, also locked. Frustration began to bubble up inside me. I had come all this way, and I was going to be defeated by a locked door. I circled the entire house. Every door, every window on the first floor was shut tight. My father, as June had said, had built it to last, and to keep people out. I was about to give up and see if I could find a way into the barn, when my eyes fell on the stone chimney that ran up the side of the house. Near the base, one of the stones looked slightly different from the others. It was a little looser in its mortar, a little cleaner. On a hunch, I knelt down in the wet grass and pushed on it. It didn't move. I pushed harder, wiggling it back and forth. Slowly, grudgingly, it shifted. I worked my fingers into the gap and pulled. The stone came free, heavy in my hands. And there, in the dark cavity behind it, was a small, rust-pocked metal box. My heart leaped. I pulled it out. It was an old cash box, the kind with a small, flimsy lock. I didn't need a key for this one. I took the stone and smashed it against the lock once, twice. On the third hit, the latch gave way. Inside, nestled on a bed of what looked like dried moss, was a single, heavy, old-fashioned iron key. It was ornate, with a circular head and a complex, toothed shaft. It looked like something out of a fairy tale, a key to a secret kingdom. I stood up, my knees aching, and went back to the front door. I slid the key into the lock. It was a perfect fit. With a satisfying, heavy clunk, the deadbolt retracted. I turned the knob, and the door swung inward on a protesting groan of hinges. The air that hit me was cold and musty, the smell of trapped time. I stood on the threshold, June's flashlight in my hand, and took my first look inside my father's house. The beam of the flashlight cut through the gloom, illuminating a world frozen in amber. Dust motes danced in the shaft of light like tiny, frantic stars. Everything was covered in a thick, uniform layer of gray dust. In the entryway, a pair of muddy work boots stood by the door, as if he had just taken them off. A heavy coat hung from a peg on the wall. Straight ahead was a staircase leading to the second floor. To my right was the living room. I stepped inside, my footsteps echoing in the profound silence. The furniture, as I'd seen through the window, was draped in white sheets. I walked over to the largest shape, the one in the middle of the room, and pulled back the cloth. A cloud of dust billowed up, making me cough. It was a simple, sturdy-looking sofa. I pulled the sheet off a nearby armchair, then a coffee table. The furniture was plain, handmade from the look of it, but solid. On the far wall was a massive stone fireplace, big enough to stand in, the stones still black with soot. To the left was the kitchen. It was a time capsule. A kettle sat on the stove. A mug was on the counter, next to a jar that still held the brown remnants of instant coffee. It was all so normal, so domestic. It looked like someone had just stepped out for a minute, not for almost 2 decades. I felt like an intruder, a trespasser in someone else's life. But this wasn't just someone else's life, it was my father's. It was the life he had built here, in secret. I wandered through the downstairs rooms, my flashlight beam my only guide. Every room told a story of a simple, solitary existence. A small dining room with a table set for one. A pantry with shelves lined with empty mason jars. But it was the small office off the living room that stopped me cold. Unlike the other rooms, this one was not draped in sheets. It was left as if he was about to return at any moment. A large wooden desk sat under a window, a comfortable-looking chair tucked into it. The desk was neat, almost obsessively so. A pen lay next to a clean blotter. A single book was open, face down. But it was what was on the wall that made me stop breathing. It was a corkboard, and it was covered in pictures of me. Me as a baby, chubby and bald. Me as a toddler, taking my first steps on a patch of grass. Me on my first day of school, with a missing front tooth and a backpack almost as big as I was. Pictures I had never seen before. Pictures he must have taken. And in between the photos, there were newspaper clippings. School honor rolls with my name circled. A grainy picture from the local paper of my soccer team winning a championship. He had been watching. All those years I thought I was alone, that I was forgotten. He had been watching. From a distance. A sob, thick and painful, tore its way out of my chest. I sank into the chair at the desk, the flashlight beam wobbling, and I cried. I cried for the little girl who had lost her father. I cried for the young man who had to watch his daughter grow up from the shadows. I cried for all the lost years, the lost moments, the life we could have had in this house together. When the tears finally subsided, I felt hollowed out, empty. I sat in the dark, in the silence, for a long time. My gaze fell back to the desk. Next to the open book, there was a small, cedar-lined box. It wasn't locked. I lifted the lid. Inside, on a bed of faded blue velvet, were two things. A stack of letters, tied with a simple piece of twine, and a small, cassette tape recorder, the kind that was popular in the 90s, with a single tape inside, labeled with one word, Maya. This was it. This was what he had left for me. The story. The answers. With trembling hands, I picked up the stack of letters. The top one was addressed to me. For Maya, on her 18th birthday. The envelope felt impossibly heavy in my hands. The paper was thick and creamy, not like the cheap stationery from the group home. His handwriting on the front, the same neat block letters from the Bible, was steady and sure. For Maya, on her 18th birthday. He had planned this. He had known, or at least hoped, that I would find my way here, to this room, on this day. The thought was both comforting and terrifying. I sat in the dusty office chair, the beam of June's flashlight resting on the desk, creating a small pool of light in the overwhelming darkness of the house. The silence pressed in, broken only by the sound of my own breathing and the frantic, hopeful thrumming of my heart. I used my thumbnail to slit the envelope open, my touch clumsy, afraid of tearing the precious contents. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded twice. I unfolded it. The letter was dated 2 weeks before his death. I had to read the date twice to be sure. He had written this, knowing his time was short. The script was the same, but it was tighter, more compact, as if he was trying to fit a lifetime of words onto a single page. My dearest Maya, it began. The words blurred for a moment, and I had to blink back fresh tears. No one had called me dearest in my entire life. If you are reading this, it means two things. First, it means I am gone. And for that, my girl, I am more sorry than words can ever say. The thought of leaving you alone in this world is the only thing that has ever truly scared me. Second, it means you have found your way home. And that, Maya, that gives me a peace I cannot describe. You were always a clever girl. I knew you would solve the puzzle. Home. He called this place home. My home. I looked around the dark, dusty room, at the pictures of my childhood on the corkboard. Maybe it was. Maybe home wasn't a place you were given, but a place you had to find. I continued reading. I know you have questions. I know the story you were told about me is a simple one. A man who lived and died without leaving much of a mark. It was important, for a time, that the world believed that story. It was the only way I could keep you safe. But it's not the whole truth. The truth is more complicated. The flashlight flickered, and I tapped it nervously against the desk until the beam steadied. I didn't have a good start in life, Maya. My own father was a hard man, and the company he kept was harder. I got tangled up in things, made mistakes a young, stupid man makes when he's trying to prove himself. I ended up owing the wrong people a lot of money. Not the kind of people who send you letters in the mail. The kind of people who make things and people disappear. A cold dread, completely different from the grief I'd been feeling, began to creep up my spine. This wasn't a story about a simple logger. This was something darker. When you were born, you changed everything for me. Holding you in my arms, I knew I couldn't be that person anymore. I couldn't have that life touch yours. So I ran. I took you, and we disappeared. I changed my name, took jobs that paid cash, lived in places for no more than a few months at a time. We were ghosts. All that time, I was saving. Every single dollar I could scrape together went into a secret account. I had a dream, you see. A dream of a place where we could be safe. A place so far off the beaten path that no one would ever find us. A place where you could put down roots. He was talking about this farm, this house. He had built it all for me, for us. I bought this land under my real name, the only clean thing I had left from my old life. I built this house with my own 2 hands. On weekends and vacations, I told my bosses I was taking to visit family I didn't have. It was my secret project, our fortress. I poured every bit of love I had for you into these walls. I dreamed of the day I could bring you here, show you the stars from the porch, teach you the names of the trees. The ache in my chest was unbearable. I could almost see him here, hammering nails, hoisting beams, his mind full of images of a future that would never come to be. But they found me, Maya. The past has a long reach. I got word. They knew I had a daughter. They were going to use you to get to me. I had to make a choice. I could run again, but they would always be looking for us. Or I could end it. I arranged for the accident. I paid off the right people, made it look convincing. I made a deal to settle the debt, a final, one-time payment. It cost me everything I had, and my life. I stopped reading, my mind reeling. An accident. My whole life I had believed it was an accident, but it wasn't. It was a sacrifice. He had chosen to die to pay a debt, to sever the connection between his dangerous past and my future. He hadn't abandoned me. He had protected me in the only way he knew how. It was a truth so enormous, so world-altering, that I couldn't fully grasp it. I felt like the floor had fallen out from under me, and I was in freefall. The only thing I couldn't part with was this land, the letter continued. My only regret is that I couldn't leave you with more. There was no money left. I had to trust the system to take care of you, which was the hardest thing I've ever had to do. And I had to trust that one day you'd be old enough and strong enough to handle the truth. I set it up so the box with the Bible would be released to you on your 18th birthday. I hoped you'd find the deed. I hoped you'd be brave enough to come looking. He had trusted me. Even as a child, he had trusted the woman I would become. This house, this land, it's all I have to give you, Maya. It's not much. It's probably in rough shape by now. There are likely back taxes owed, legal tangles I couldn't foresee. People might try to take it from you. But it's yours. It was paid for with love and hope. What you do with it is up to you. You can sell it, walk away and never look back. Use the money to start a new life. There would be no shame in that. Or you can stay. You can make it the home I always dreamed it would be for you. The choice is yours. It's the only real gift I can give you. A choice. The letter ended with a final, heartbreaking sign-off. Whatever you decide, know that I have loved you every second of every day. Be happy, my Maya. Be brave. Your father, David. I folded the letter, my hands shaking so badly I could barely control them. I put it back in the envelope and placed it on the desk. The silence in the room was no longer empty. It was filled with his voice, with his love, with the weight of his sacrifice. I looked at the cassette recorder. I knew, with a bone-deep certainty, that his voice was on that tape. I wasn't ready to hear it. Not yet. The information in the letter was a physical weight. I felt exhausted, emotionally scoured. I stumbled out of the office and into the living room. I didn't bother with the sheets this time. I collapsed onto the dusty sofa, pulled my knees to my chest, and stared into the darkness. He hadn't abandoned me. He had saved me. The story of my life, the one I had carried around for a decade, the story of being the unwanted daughter of a deadbeat dad, was a lie. The truth was so much more painful and so much more beautiful. And he had given me a choice: sell or stay, the easy path or the hard one. For the first time in my life, I had agency, I had power, and I had no idea what to do with it. The house was cold. The sun, I presumed, had set. The darkness outside the windows was now absolute. I was alone, in a house full of ghosts and memories, with a choice that felt too big for one person to make. I must have fallen asleep on the sofa, a fitful, dream-plagued sleep filled with images of falling trees and shadowy figures. I woke to a strange gray light filtering through the grimy windows. Morning. I was stiff, cold, and my stomach was a hollow ache. The reality of my situation came crashing back in. I was in a derelict house, in the middle of nowhere, with no food, no electricity, and a decision to make that felt like it could break me. For a moment, the overwhelming desire was to just run, to walk back down that lane, hitch a ride back to Portland, and pretend none of this had ever happened. I could find Mrs. Albright, tell her I'd made a mistake, and beg for a place in a shelter. It would be a return to the familiar misery, the predictable grayness of the life I'd known. That was the sell option, in a way. Just walk away. The thought was tempting. It was the easy path he'd mentioned. But then I thought of the letter. I thought of the pictures on the corkboard. I thought of him, alone in this house, building a future for me he would never see. Walking away felt like a betrayal of his sacrifice. It felt like saying his love wasn't worth the trouble. I sat up, the dust motes dancing in the morning light. I couldn't do it. I couldn't run. I had to see this through. But how? The letter mentioned back taxes, legal tangles. Those were words I didn't understand, but they sounded expensive. I had less than $100 to my name. I felt a surge of panic, the familiar feeling of being small and powerless against a system I couldn't see. I needed help. I needed an adult. The thought was so ingrained, so automatic, that it took me a second to realize I was the adult now. But I wasn't entirely alone. I had June's number, and I had Mrs. Albright. My fingers were stiff with cold as I pulled out my phone. The battery was at 12%, and still no signal. Of course. I remembered June saying she lived a mile back. I could walk there. But the thought of leaving the house, even for a short time, felt wrong. I needed to ground myself here first, explore, understand what I was dealing with. This was phase 2 of my father's puzzle. First, find the place. Second, understand the place. I decided to start with the rest of the house. The upstairs was just as dusty, just as frozen in time. There were 2 bedrooms. One was clearly his. A simple iron bed frame, a handmade dresser. The closet was empty, except for a pair of worn-out jeans and a flannel shirt hanging from a hook. I touched the fabric. It was rough, smelling faintly of cedar and thyme. It was a smell I remembered. The other bedroom was smaller. It was empty, but it was different. The walls were painted a pale, cheerful yellow. In the center of the floor was a single object, a wooden rocking horse, beautifully carved and sanded smooth, its painted eyes seeming to watch me with a hopeful expression. It was a child's room, my room, the room he had prepared for me. He had painted it yellow. He had carved me a rocking horse. The love in this house was a palpable thing. It was in the sturdy joinery of the furniture, in the smooth finish of the rocking horse, in the cheerful yellow paint on the walls of an empty room. It was everywhere. And it was starting to feel less like a weight and more like an anchor. I spent the rest of the morning doing a full inventory. I walked the perimeter of the house, checking for damage. The roof looked mostly intact, but the sagging porch was a major problem. The broken window upstairs needed to be boarded up. The plumbing, I discovered after finding the hand pump for the well out back, was a closed system, not connected to any municipal water. With a few minutes of vigorous pumping, I was rewarded with a gush of rusty water, which eventually ran clear and cold. Water, that was a huge victory. In the kitchen, I found a stash of canned goods in a deep pantry. Beans, stew, canned peaches, all of it years past its expiration date, but probably still edible. Emergency rations, he had thought of that too. In the barn, I found a treasure trove. Tools, a whole wall of them, neatly organized on a pegboard. Saws, hammers, drills. A generator, which was probably out of gas and hadn't been run in years. A stack of lumber, covered in a tarp. He had left me not just a house, but the means to fix it. As I was exploring the dark corners of the barn, my flashlight beam fell on something that didn't belong. Tucked away under a pile of old tarps was a large military-style footlocker. It was heavy, and it was locked with a combination padlock. I immediately thought of the wrong people my father had mentioned in his letter. Was this part of his past? Something dangerous? My heart hammered as I dragged it out into the center of the barn floor. There was no obvious way to get it open. The lock was heavy-duty. I could try to smash it, but I was more likely to break my hand. I ran my fingers over the cold metal of the lock, and then I remembered the Bible. The deed had been in Proverbs. Was it a random spot or a clue? I jogged back to the house, my mind racing. I grabbed the Bible from the office. I didn't know what I was looking for. A combination? A key? I flipped through the pages, my eyes scanning the verses. Nothing jumped out. It was just a book. I was about to give up when I noticed something. In the front, on the page where he'd written his name, there were 3 small, faint pinpricks under the date of my birth. I almost missed them. I ran my finger over them. They were almost invisible. I looked closer, under the first number of the date, the second number, and the 4th number. My birthday is July 15th. 7/15. He had pricked the 7, the 1, and the 5. 715. It was a long shot, a crazy movie plot long shot, but it was all I had. I ran back to the barn, my lungs burning. I knelt by the footlocker, my fingers trembling as I dialed the numbers into the lock. 7, 1, 5. I pulled on the shackle. It clicked open. I stared at it for a full second, a giddy laugh bubbling up in my throat. He had left me a trail of breadcrumbs, a puzzle only I could solve. I was so proud of him, so proud of myself, my heart felt like it would burst. I took a deep breath and lifted the heavy lid of the footlocker. I wasn't sure what I was expecting. Weapons? Stacks of cash from his criminal past? Something illicit and dangerous? What I saw was far more surprising. The footlocker was filled to the brim with books. Not the worn paperbacks from the box in my room. These were textbooks. Thick, serious-looking volumes on agricultural science, crop rotation, soil management, animal husbandry, and small-scale forestry. There were books on plumbing, electrical wiring, and carpentry. And on top of it all was another letter, this one much shorter. My Maya, if you're reading this, you've decided to stay. I knew you would. You have my stubbornness. You also have my hope. I never had the chance to be a farmer, but I studied, I learned. I wanted to do this right. All my research is in this box. This is how you build a life here. This is the manual for your home. Use it. Learn from my dreams. And one more thing. Look under the floorboards in your room. Under the rocking horse. There's one last piece of the puzzle. The part that will let you fight for this place. I love you, Dad. I just sat there on the dusty floor of the barn, the smell of old hay and new hope filling my lungs. This wasn't just a house, it was a legacy. He hadn't just left me a property. He had left me a complete education on how to make it thrive. He had left me a plan. He had left me the tools, the lumber, the generator, and now the knowledge. I felt a profound shift inside me. The fear and uncertainty were still there, but they were now joined by a fierce, blazing determination. This was my fight now. My choice was made. I was staying. I walked back to the house, my steps lighter than they had been since I arrived. I went upstairs to the yellow room. The little rocking horse stood waiting for me. I knelt down and ran my hand over its smooth, curved back. Under the rocking horse, I looked at the floorboards. They were wide planks of Douglas fir, held down with old-fashioned, square-headed nails. One of the boards, directly under the horse, looked a little shorter than the others. I used the pry bar I'd brought back from the barn. The old wood groaned in protest, but with a final squeal of nails, the board came loose. I lifted it up. Beneath it, in the dark space between the floor joists, was a metal box. It was the same kind of box that had held the key, but larger and heavier. I lifted it out. It wasn't locked. I opened the lid, and my breath caught in my throat. It was full of money. Stacks and stacks of cash, bundled in paper bands. I didn't know how much was there, but it looked like a fortune. And on top of the money was a single, folded piece of paper. A tax assessment from the county, dated almost 20 years ago, with the amount of annual property tax circled. And beside it, a handwritten ledger. For 17 years, my father had calculated the estimated property tax, plus interest and penalties. He had saved the exact amount he thought would be needed to make the property whole again. It wasn't a treasure. It was a tool. It was the ammunition I needed for the fight he knew was coming. He hadn't just given me the house, the tools, and the knowledge. He had given me the one thing I needed most. A chance. A real, fighting chance. I sat there on the floor of my yellow room, a room I had never slept in, surrounded by the evidence of a father's fierce, desperate, and undying love. And for the first time, I felt truly at home. I wasn't a runaway or an orphan anymore. I was the keeper of a promise. I was the heir to a dream, and I was ready to fight for it. I thought about you all, listening to this. I just sat there, the world spinning. Have you ever had a moment where everything you thought you knew was turned upside down? A moment that redefines your entire past and sets a completely new course for your future. It's a lonely, terrifying, and strangely exhilarating feeling. I read the comments you all leave on these stories, and I know I'm not alone in that feeling. So many of you have faced your own versions of this, your own hidden boxes and secret histories. If this story is hitting you, if it's resonating with some forgotten part of your own journey, let me know in the comments. Your stories, your solidarity, they become part of a larger chorus that says we are not alone. It helps, more than you can possibly know. The next morning, I woke up with a purpose. The fear and confusion had been burned away in the fire of discovery, leaving behind a core of cold, hard resolve. I had a mission. Step 1. Get to a phone that worked and make 2 calls. One to June, and one to Mrs. Albright. I packed a small bag with the cash box, the deed, and the tax ledger. Leaving that much money in the house, even a hidden house, felt reckless. I ate a can of cold beans for breakfast, a meal that should have been miserable but tasted like victory. Then I locked the front door with the iron key, replaced the stone that hid it, and started the 1-mile walk to June's house. Her place was a small, neat cottage with a plume of smoke rising from the chimney and a garden full of winter greens. As I walked up the gravel path, she came out onto the porch, a mug of coffee in her hand. She wasn't surprised to see me. "I had a feeling you'd be by," she said, her bright eyes studying my face. "You look different than you did yesterday." "I feel different," I admitted. "Can I use your phone? I need to make a couple of calls. It's important." "Of course, child. Come on in." Her living room was warm and cozy, filled with books and handmade quilts. She handed me an old-fashioned cordless phone, and then, with a wisdom I was beginning to appreciate, she went into the kitchen, giving me my privacy. My first call was to Mrs. Albright. It went to voicemail. I took a deep breath. "Hi, Mrs. Albright. It's Maya Callan. Listen, I'm okay. I know I was supposed to check into a shelter, but something came up. I'm in a place called Stillwater. It was my father's property. It's a long story. I'm safe. I need some help. I need a lawyer. The letter he left mentioned back taxes, and I think someone might try to take the land. Can you help me find someone who deals with property law? Someone who's on our side? I'll call you back tomorrow. I'm okay, really." Hanging up felt like I had taken a huge, terrifying step. I was asking for help, but not as a victim. I was asking for it as a partner, a client. My next call was to the number on the tax assessment for the county records office. A bored-sounding clerk answered. I explained, as calmly as I could, that I was the heir to the property at the address on the deed, and I needed to find out the status of the back taxes. The silence on the other end of the line was long. "Oh, honey," the clerk finally said, her voice full of pity. "That property is on the auction block. The sale is in 2 weeks. The floor seemed to drop out from under me. 2 weeks. The amount owed is substantial, she continued. 17 years of unpaid taxes, plus penalties and interest. The total is $87,452. $87,000. It was an astronomical sum. However, she added, if the full amount is paid before the date of the auction, the property can be redeemed by the legal heir. And who is the legal heir? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. According to our records, the property is still in the name of David Callan. You'd have to go through probate court to prove you're his next of kin. That takes months, usually. Months. I had 2 weeks. It was a catch-22. I couldn't pay the taxes without proving I was the heir, and I couldn't prove I was the heir in time to pay the taxes. They had built a perfect trap. I felt a surge of despair. It was hopeless. There is one other thing, the clerk said, her voice dropping. A developer, a company called North Cascade Timber and Development, has already put in a pre-auction bid for the property. They've been buying up all the old parcels in that area. They're very motivated. Of course they were. This wasn't just bureaucratic neglect. It was an active threat. This company was the modern version of the wrong people my father had run from. They weren't going to break my legs, but they were going to use the law to steal my home. I thanked the clerk and hung up, my mind racing. I walked into the kitchen, where June was pretending to wipe down an already clean counter. She took one look at my face, Bad news? The worst, I said, and I told her everything. The auction, the 2-week deadline, the probate court trap, the development company. She listened patiently, nodding. When I was finished, she poured me a cup of coffee. 87,000, she mused, more to herself than to me. David was always good at math. I must have looked confused. Your father, she clarified. He would have calculated that. He would have known what was needed. He did, I said, my voice full of awe. I opened my backpack and showed her the ledger and the box of money. Her eyes widened. Lord have mercy, she whispered. He really did think of everything. But it doesn't matter, I said, the despair creeping back in. I can't use it. I can't prove I'm his heir in time. June tapped her finger on the counter, thinking. Probate court in the city takes months, she said. But Stillwater isn't the city. Things work a little differently up here. Our county judge, Judge Miller, he's been on the bench for 40 years. He knew your father. He knew everyone. A tiny spark of hope ignited in my chest. You think he could help? I think, she said, a slow smile spreading across her face. It's time we paid him a visit. He holds court in the county seat every Wednesday. That's tomorrow. The next 24 hours were a blur. June made a call to a friend who worked at the county courthouse, getting me on the judge's docket for the next day. She helped me organize my evidence, the deed, the Bible with my birth date, my own birth certificate, which I had in my backpack, and my father's letter. The letter was the key, she said. It was his last will and testament, in a way. That evening, as I was getting ready to sleep on her comfortable sofa, she told me about my father. Not the myth or the ghost, but the man. He showed up here about 20 years ago, she said, her voice soft with memory. Bought the old McGregor place. Kept to himself, mostly. But he was a good neighbor. If a storm knocked down your fence, he'd be there the next day to help you fix it. He never talked about his past. We all have things we don't talk about up here. But he talked about his future. He talked about his daughter. He did. Oh yes, he was building that house for you. He'd show me drawings he'd made, a room for you, painted yellow. He was so proud of it, so full of hope. She paused. When we heard about the accident, none of us believed it. David was the most careful man I've ever known. It didn't make sense, but there was nothing we could do. Her words filled in the gaps, painting a picture of a man who was quiet but kind, haunted but hopeful. The next morning, I put on the nicest clothes I had, a clean pair of jeans and a non-wrinkled shirt June had loaned me, and we drove the 30 miles to the county seat. The courthouse was an old brick building that smelled of floor wax and history. Judge Miller was a terrifying-looking man with a bald head, a face like a grumpy bulldog, and kind eyes. We sat in his chambers, not a formal courtroom. He listened, his face impassive, as I laid out my story. I showed him the deed, the Bible, my birth certificate. My hands were shaking as I handed him my father's letter. He read it slowly, his expression unreadable. When he was done, he folded it carefully and handed it back to me. He leaned back in his chair, which squeaked in protest. I remember your father, David Callan, he said, his voice a low rumble. He did some work on my barn one year. Solid work, honest man. He looked at me, his gaze sharp and intelligent. And I've had my eye on this North Cascade Timber and Development Company. They've been using the tax auction system to swallow up family properties for pennies on the dollar. It's legal, but it ain't right. He picked up a pen from his desk. The law is a tool, young lady. It can be used to build. or it can be used as a hammer to smash things. These developers, they're using it as a hammer. I prefer to use it to build. He scribbled something on a piece of paper and handed it to his clerk. I am making a summary judgment, based on the evidence presented, which I find compelling and, frankly, irrefutable. I am declaring you, Maya Callan, the sole legal heir of David Callan. The clerk will draw up the papers of succession. You'll have them by the end of the day. I was stunned into silence. It was that simple? But probate? I stammered. Probate is for when the facts are in dispute, the judge said with a dismissive wave of his hand. The facts here are clear as a mountain stream. Your father left you a letter that is, for all intents and purposes, a holographic will. He left you a Bible with your birth date. He left you a farm. The only thing in dispute is whether this court is going to let a predatory development company use a loophole to steal a good man's legacy from his daughter. And the answer to that is no. Not on my watch. He stood up, signaling the meeting was over. Now, you take those papers to the tax office, you pay what's owed, and you go home and make your father proud. I walked out of the courthouse into the bright sunshine, the official papers clutched in my hand. I felt dizzy with relief. June was beaming. I told you things worked a little differently up here, she said. We went straight to the tax office. I walked up to the same clerk I had spoken to on the phone. I didn't say a word. I just slid the court order and the cash box across the counter. Her eyes went wide. She spent the next 30 minutes counting the money. The final tally was $87,500. My father had even accounted for a little extra. She stamped my receipt. Paid in full, with a satisfying thud. The property was mine. Free and clear. The fight was over. Or at least, the first part of it. Driving back to Stillwater, I felt a sense of peace I had never known. The future was still a huge, terrifying unknown. The house needed a roof. The porch needed to be rebuilt. I needed to figure out how to get the electricity turned back on, how to work the generator, how to plant a garden. I had a mountain of work ahead of me. But for the first time, it felt like my mountain to climb. As we pulled up to the lane leading to my house, another truck was pulling away. A shiny new pickup with the North Cascade Timber and Development logo on the side. A man in a suit gave us a hard look as they passed. He didn't look happy. June just smiled and gave a little wave. Looks like they got the news, she said. I knew this wasn't the end of my dealings with them. They wouldn't give up that easily. But I wasn't afraid. I had the law on my side. I had good neighbors, and I had the love of a father who had built a fortress for me. That night, back in my own dusty, cold, perfect house, I finally felt ready. I took out the small cassette recorder. I pressed play. And after almost 20 years of silence, I heard my father's voice. It was deep and gentle and full of a love that had crossed time and death to find me. Hi, Maya, he said. If you're hearing this, it means you did it. You came home. The tape was only about 10 minutes long, but those 10 minutes changed the landscape of my soul. His voice wasn't a memory anymore. It was a living presence in the room. He didn't talk about the danger or the past. He talked about the future. He told me about the well, how deep it was, and the best way to maintain the pump. He told me which of the apple trees in the overgrown orchard gave the sweetest fruit. He told me about a patch of wild strawberries that grew near the creek in early summer. He told me to watch for the eagles that nested in the tall fir tree at the edge of the property. He wasn't giving me instructions. He was giving me a tour of his heart. He was showing me all the things he had loved about this place, all the things he hoped I would love too. This land is stubborn, Maya, his voice crackled on the old tape. But it's honest. It'll test you. It'll break your back and freeze your fingers. But if you listen to it, if you're good to it, it will be good to you. It will provide. It will be a home. The tape ended with the sound of him taking a deep breath. "I'm proud of you, kid. I always have been." Then, just before the click and the hiss of the empty tape, he whispered one last thing. "Welcome home." I sat in the darkness, tears streaming down my face, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of gratitude, of release, of a profound and overwhelming sense of belonging. The ghost I had been chasing wasn't a ghost at all. He was an architect, a gardener, a father who had planted a seed of hope 20 years ago, and I was the harvest. The next few months were the hardest and most rewarding of my life. The work was endless. I started with the basics. With June's help, I found a local handyman, a gruff old-timer named Earl, who knew my father. He helped me get the generator running. The moment the first light bulb flickered to life in the kitchen felt like a miracle. He showed me how to patch the roof, how to safely tear down the rotten porch and frame a new one using the lumber my father had left in the barn. Word got around the small community of Stillwater. People started showing up. June organized a housewarming, which was really just an excuse for the entire neighborhood to descend on my property with tools and casseroles. The men helped me and Earl raise the new porch beams. The women helped me air out the house, beat the dust out of the rugs, and wash every dish and piece of furniture. They brought me jars of preserves, quilts, and advice. They told me stories about my father, small anecdotes that filled in the portrait of the man I was just getting to know. I learned that he had a terrible singing voice, but would sing to the birds anyway. I learned that he once rescued a neighbor's dog from a culvert during a flood. I learned that he always paid cash and always tipped too much. They weren't just helping me fix a house. They were welcoming me into the community my father had chosen for me. They were my inheritance, too. One afternoon, while I was clearing out the overgrown vegetable garden, a sleek black car pulled up the lane. The man from the development company, the one I'd seen in the truck, got out. He was dressed in an expensive suit that looked ridiculous in the middle of my muddy yard. He introduced himself as Mr. Thompson. "I'll get straight to the point, Miss Callan," he said, his smile not reaching his eyes. "We know you paid the back taxes. Congratulations. But this property is of no real value to you. It's isolated. It needs a fortune in repairs. It's a burden." "It's my home," I said, my hands tightening on the handle of my shovel. "Be that as it may," he continued, ignoring me, "North Cascade is prepared to make you a very generous offer. $500,000. Cash. You could walk away from all this, go to college, travel the world. Be free. $500,000. It was a staggering amount of money. It was the easy wrong my father had written about. A year ago, I would have taken that money without a second thought. But standing there, on my own land, covered in dirt and sweat, the offer felt like an insult. "This land isn't for sale," I said, my voice steady. He sighed, the patient act slipping. "Miss Callan, be reasonable. We are going to develop this entire valley. We have the permits, we have the investors. Your little 50-acre holdout is an inconvenience, but we will acquire it, one way or another. We can make this easy, or we can make it very, very difficult for you. Zoning challenges, access road disputes, nuisance lawsuits. We have very good lawyers." It was a threat, plain and simple. The old fear, the feeling of being small and powerless, tried to surface. But it was different now. I wasn't alone. I looked past him, at my house, with its new porch and patched roof. I thought of June and Earl and Judge Miller. I thought of my father. "I have a good lawyer, too," I said. "And I have good neighbors. And I have all the time in the world. This is my home. You are not welcome here. Please leave." For a long moment, he just stared at me, his mask of civility completely gone. I could see the anger in his eyes. He had underestimated me. Everyone had always underestimated me. Finally, he gave a curt nod, got back in his expensive car, and drove away, kicking up a cloud of dust. I knew it wasn't the end, but I also knew I would win. Because he was fighting for money, I was fighting for love. Over the next year, life settled into a new rhythm. The rhythm of the seasons, of hard work, of healing. I learned how to plant a garden, how to split firewood, how to fix a leaky faucet. I read every book in the footlocker. I enrolled in online classes at the local community college, studying agriculture and business management. I was slowly but surely becoming the person my father had dreamed I would be. The house was no longer a dusty time capsule. It was a home. It was filled with light and warmth and the smell of baking bread. The yellow room was now my office, the place where I planned the future of the farm. The rocking horse sat in the corner, a silent reminder of how far I had come. I didn't get rich. I didn't travel the world. I stayed. I put down roots. I chose the harder right, and it turned out to be the most rewarding choice of my life. This place, this farm, is more than just land and a house. It's a living testament to a father's love. It's the proof that even from the deepest darkness, a seed of hope can be planted. It's the second chance my father never got, but the one he gave to me. And I am growing a life here, a life that is beautiful and honest and real. My story isn't a fairy tale. The scars of my past are still there. But here, in this place, they don't define me. This isn't just about a house or a deed. It's about rewriting your own story. It's about finding home not in a place, but in a purpose. If my story has taught you anything, I hope it's that you can build a home out of the broken pieces you're given. You can find strength in the legacies left behind.